Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Metropolis Forum's webinar on how the pandemic can be a portal to a new way of thinking about the outdoors. Today's session is supported by and produced in partnership with Landscape Forums. Thank you so much to Landscape Forums for making this and other sessions in our webinar series possible. Today's session is part of a series, The Pandemic is a Portal. We're addressing 3 topics as part of the series. A couple of weeks ago, some of you might have joined our conversation on how the pandemic can be a portal to a new understanding of sustainability. Today, we're going to be talking about the outdoors. The title of the series, The Pandemic is a Portal, is inspired by a piece of writing produced by Arundhati Roy in the Financial Times in early April. She wrote in her piece, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So our question today is, what is this new world that we might be able to build or that we might be able to step into as far as outdoor spaces, public life, green spaces are concerned? American cities at this point have somewhat of a mixed approach to public and outdoor space. During the pandemic, I think there's a recognition that we can't effectively improve public health outcomes without the use of green space and outdoor space, something we've recognized for at least a couple of hundred years now. Yet there is, of course, a fear of large gatherings. So what is the way forward? How can we use design and design-informed technology to ensure the vitality of outdoor and public spaces? To answer those questions, not small ones, we have with us an amazing group of panelists. We have with us Kinder Baumgartner, who is the managing principal in Houston for SWA Group. Kinder, thank you so much for joining us today. We also have Kurt Martin, who's Chief Creative Officer at Landscape Forums. Kurt, thanks for joining us. Also with us today is Roberto Rivera, who is the Chair of Landscape Architecture and Environmental and Urban Design at FIU, and also the VP of Research for the Landscape Architecture Foundation. Roberto, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. And Dr. Sarah Warber, who is Clinical Professor Emerita for Family Medicine at the University of Michigan. Thank you so much, Dr. Warber, for joining us. Kinder, I'd love to kick this off with you. You've worked on some of the most significant urban landscapes in the United States and around the world today, including, of course, the Buffalo Bayou in Houston, where you live. Do you think this pandemic, or as we're working through this phase of reopening, living in fear of resurgence of infection in the US and so on, do you think this pandemic will change how people use and interact with green spaces, with outdoor spaces in the city?
No, I'm kidding. I mean, I think it already has, right? In a lot of ways, at least in Houston, what happened here is, we got started with the pandemic, and things were kind of on the right track. And it wasn't just, the caseloads that were on the right track, the weather was perfect. And I remember sitting on my front porch saying, man, we're so lucky we're going through this right now. Because what you saw were streets and parks just full of people. And they were being responsible. Yeah, you could take a photograph with that long lens and make it look like everyone was right on top of each other. But if you're actually in the space looking, people were responsible. Now it's 100 degrees in Houston, and people are using stuff a little differently. However, they're still out there. The running shoes that they bought 2 months ago, the bicycle that they cleaned off, from their garage and have, been riding on the Bayou Greenways trails or in the Bayou, Buffalo Bayou. Yeah, they're still using them. And I think that's a big change, is that this kind of landscape that I think Buffalo Bayou has, but others as well, it's just, it kind of captures the imagination, because you decide what you're going to do there. A lot of it's about trails, it's about picnicking, it's views, it's nature, all that stuff, right? it's not like a highly programmed space where you're told what to do, right? Or it's kind of dependent on lots of events to kind of, dictate how to use the space. You decide. And so people have adopted those spaces in huge numbers. And I don't think they're going to stop. I think they're going to demand more of it. I think the problem, and we can talk about it in more detail, will be funding, right, going forward. That as this demand kicks up, the fact that some of probably the money that goes into creating these spaces may be less available. And that's going to be the big challenge for landscape architects and designers to crack.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing out about programming, or the need for, if I may put it that way, the need for a lack of programmed space is so interesting, because I think in addition to what you're talking about, even culturally, we're in this moment where we're really bound by, we've learned fast and a lot of different guidelines and a lot of different sort of ways of using space, especially our homes. And there's really such a wonderful, I think, sense of relief in what you're talking about, especially, in terms of how people might go out and use unprogrammed space. And then, to see that demand grow. You've set us on a really interesting way of thinking about it. Kurt, I'd love to bring you in here. Of course, outdoor space has to be made useful for human beings in some sense. This is why we have parks, so we have pathways, we have waterfronts. How should we be thinking about the design elements of outdoor space? Pathways, lighting, seating, even security and safety. How can we help people as they feel that urge to go out, that Kinder was talking about, as we see that surge in demand for the outdoor life, as we come out hopefully the other end of this pandemic, how can we help people stay safe?
Yeah, it's a very interesting time. It's full of changes, and I would say we can't keep doing what we've always done. I think it's really important for humans to have a connection to nature. That's something we all share, and sometimes we forget about that. But it's times like this, you actually see more and more people outdoors, and sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's bad, as we've seen on the news recently from in various areas of the country. And when I think about space, and when our teams think about space, and our company thinks about our approaches outdoor space, we're really trying to engage in a conversation in terms of how can we help the design conversation? How can we transform outdoor spaces and evolve the thinking in a time of tremendous change, be it socioeconomical change, be it behavioral change, be it climate change. There's just so many things happening at one time. For us, it's really about staying nimble and providing solutions that are relevant today, that ideally connect people to nature safely, putting, I would say, health and well-being at the forefront. So not just physical health, but mental health and psychological health. And how can our products, how can we design products that support landscape architects, support designers in that challenge?
Right. Yeah, again, I think that sense of outdoor space lying at the intersection of so many different forms of change is so interesting. Social changes we're living now, brought upon by the pandemic, and of course ecological change, which has been at the forefront of landscape architecture practice for some time now. And then having this additional responsibility of keeping people safe, but also helping them be healthier, in the aftermath. There's a really a big sense of responsibility there, which is interesting. Roberto, Kurt talked about, reconnecting with nature. And, that's definitely been one of the themes in your work. What has struck me is, especially as, late winter went into early spring here in New York City, it just seemed so incongruous that our lives had kind of ground to a standstill, but We were still seeing buds on the trees. Nature was still kind of doing its thing, and natural cycles, right? Non-human life has pretty much been unaffected by COVID-19, has been affected by climate change. So there are larger cycles of change happening. How can we come out of this crisis with a new understanding of our relationship with nature, especially if, as Kurt says, we have this urge to reconnect with nature?
Sure. Well, I think nature has a way of reminding us of its importance and its primacy. I mean, from direct experience over the last month, I've seen 2 coyote pups and their mother in my neighbor's yard. And I live about 30 minutes south of the city of Miami proper. So that just paints a picture of those of you who might think of Miami as just beachfront and, and South Beach. But I think the experience of the last few months, both in terms of the pandemic, but also in terms of the seismic shift in understanding the social inequity, have really been a lesson in humility. And I think that that will shape our relationship with nature and with each other in a seminal way. So much of it has to do with stopping, listening, observing. And I say humility because despite our kind of overall evolved sense of self, we're kind of being brought to our knees by the natural world. If you think of COVID, it's a seemingly simple, very photogenic, spherical virus, which we really don't understand. And it's challenged almost every assumption about the natural world, its power or powerlessness that we thought, perhaps. It's also illuminated the strengths and weaknesses of society, safety, security, all these constructs, both literal and figurative. And so it's really asked us to rethink who we are. And for the longest time, I think as designers, planners, architects, engineers, we've been comfortable with this notion of otherness, both in the natural world or in society with, people who don't look like us. And it's often been a one-way transaction. We design things and to stack things in favor of us. And I think this is really changing because while the word urgency is really important, we haven't had as important a challenge that has asked us to adjust from within to the level that we're being asked. And I think that it's probably correct to say that we feel, I think as designers, masters of change when we have control. But the pandemic and social, justice issues and struggles really mean that those reins aren't, in our hands anymore. So nature has been there all the time, open spaces out there. It's just that now it's kind of this existential setting that we need as a lifeline to be able to relate to each other safely. And I hope really that relationship will evolve into a new identity that reminds us that we are part of this system and part of this society. And the more that we think about that, the more that we accept that humility, we kind of get over that and then pay attention to the things that we have to do. This duty to learn, to listen, to act, to fight, to sort of leverage all the technological and social media savvy that we have at our disposal, but in crafting this kind of new identity.
Right. Thank you so much for bringing in that angle of equity into the conversation. I think there's a landscape architecture, public space has had a tortured idea with this notion of equity. While certainly every major park in the United States, including our nature reserves, were conceived as democratic or equally accessible spaces. Yet in practice, we know that green space in cities has its own way of defining access and limiting access. And as we saw in the case of the High Line and the Beltline and some other projects, certainly can contribute to or exacerbate inequities in urban development. So it's a really interesting idea. How do we, in the light of having the real awareness around anti-racism in this country, and understanding that in the urban context, how do we layer that on to our expectations of public space moving forward? I'm gonna bring in Dr. Warber just in a second, but just a reminder, we're here talking about how the pandemic can be a portal to a new understanding of the outdoors. The session is being produced in partnership with Landscape Forms. And we have with us today Dr. Sarah Warber from the University of Michigan, Kurt Martin from Landscape Forms, Kinder Baumgartner from SWA Group, and Roberto Rovira from FIU. Dr. Warber, I'd love to bring you in here. You know, some of your research, at least in integrated medicine, has been about you know, green spaces as health resources. So how can green spaces be part of our understanding of a health system? And you know, I wonder if you're thinking about ways in which, in this current crisis, green spaces can become a way, in general, but also, of course, since we're talking to an audience largely of designers and design professionals here, a way for architects and landscape architects to help drive public health outcomes that will lead us out of this pandemic.
Well, thanks, Avi, for inviting me. And as the lone health person here, I guess I want to paint a little bit of that perspective around health and how it interrelates with green space and the environment. When we think about public health, we're really talking about this whole milieu that's around us. And as a physician, I think about that in a way, but I also think about what's the health of the person sitting right in front of me? What is the health of the individual? And what I think is fascinating is how we've found out that the environment can actually change our physiology. So the research that's been done on forest bathing, particularly in Japan and Korea, has shown us that our immune system changes, our endocrine system changes, our heart rate variability changes into a more nurturative state rather than that anxiety stress state. And then other research has shown us that, you know, the physical activity that takes place in nature may actually be better for us than the physical activity that takes place in a gym, let's say. Maybe that has to do with the air and the oxygen or what, I'm not sure. I don't think we know that yet. Our mental health is improved by being in nature. And that includes this ability to restore our attentional capacity, but also that reflection that we need as individuals to kind of put our lives in order. And when we think about how COVID-19 has affected us all, we've had a deep need to reflect and to understand, and as you're emphasizing, find the way to the new portal. We also know that positive emotions are enhanced in nature, and you can get awfully down in the dumps around this time, but if those positive emotions are enhanced, they're going to help carry you through. It's an interesting thing when you think about our social well-being, because nature often provides that space in which we connect with each other. And interesting, some research has shown that we actually, we behave better towards each other if we're in a space that has nature in it. And then some of our research has focused on spiritual well-being. And so not everybody's comfortable with those concepts, but in fact, they're very important. Particularly our ability to connect with a sort of transcendent other, however you might like to describe that. And sometimes that's found in our experiences in nature. I think the other side of this is the fact that from a public health standpoint, and even myself as a primary care physician, we're always thinking about the social determinants of health. And what we know is that everything we do in a doctor's office, health system, is minuscule in comparison to what the social determinants of health do. And if COVID-19, I guess if we had any doubts before this time, it's in stark reality now, how the the housing, the economic opportunity, the transportation, the food security, the job security, all those things are social determinants of health. And parts of our country are just being slammed one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, and dying. So if you ever had a wonderment of whether designers and architects and rebuilders and urban planners could make a difference, and of course politicians and people with capital to redistribute in new ways, that's where the action is, and that's where we can make a difference about a new society. And every bit of that, as I look through all these social determinants of health, design in essence hits them all, and particularly then our relationship with the outdoors, and whether we have partitioned places or do we flow in and out between indoors and outdoors, and really bring these health benefits then into the whole picture.
Right, right. Thank you so much, Dr. Barber, for that super comprehensive understanding of where outdoor space sits within our understanding of health today. I think the point about social determinants of health is well taken. I think it links to so many of the other things that our panelists have brought up before you. Whether we're talking about individual sort of needs, our need for outdoor space, our need for relief from this pandemic, whether we're talking about social change, environmental change, we're talking about equity, all of those things connect up, are not that they connect up, but that they're inextricably linked and threaded through health. If health is our primary motivator today, then let it be a motivator for us to build new kinds of spaces and new relationships with each other through space. We have a few questions here, and so I'd love to start taking questions from our audience. Please, for all our panelists, please jump in wherever you'd like to weigh in. I think we're going to start with this question from one of our attendees, I guess from Chicago. And they ask, in Chicago, the mayor shut down the whole lakefront during the pandemic and has only reopened it to moving or transient use. How are you using the potential for the outdoors to be, for part of the outdoors to be shut down going forward in your designs or client recommendations? Are you reckoning with the idea that we might not be able to use some part of outdoor space in the near future? And how is that changing your approach to projects and to spaces? Kinder, maybe you want to come in first on this, and then we'll go to Roberto and Kurt as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated problem. One thing we find is on projects, the person that answers the phone when a complaint is lodged has a lot of power, or maybe today it's the person that responds to the Twitter feed. But so yeah, I'm sure that there were complaints. People are using the outdoors in an inappropriate fashion, right? Or they saw, like I mentioned earlier, that long lens shot that looks like everybody's doing the wrong thing. And so a lot of power is given to certain people to just respond, get out there and do something, right? Close that thing down. I think that there probably, I'm guessing, I don't know the exact situation. Yeah, there's probably areas that were not being used appropriately. And those are probably, what we're talking about, some of these more program type zones where they, people are kind of forced, they're designed to pull people together, right? And to hang out in a really tight kind of a setting. Or maybe there's some sort of sports facility, right? People are playing basketball or tennis or ping pong, whatever the hot thing in that spot is, right? So it's a mixed bag. There's areas that you probably need we need to be respectful and say, yeah, we shouldn't use those in that way. And there's other areas that we need to say, hey, if people are moving on bikes and they're running and they're jogging, but maybe if they're picnicking too in small groups, just families, we need to do that. You know, picking up on stuff that Kurt does every day, which is designing furniture, you know, that's a big part of how you kind of inform people what they can and can't do. If I can sit here, I'm going to sit here, right? If I can't, I keep moving. There may be other types of ways to think about that. But you know, here in Houston, I mean, all those kind of places that are about moving, we've kept those open. I think we have to remember too, some of this stuff's just going to go back to normal at some point, right? In certain ways, right? Those program spaces, they're going to be super important a year or two from now, right? So we shouldn't forget them. But in the meantime, yeah, maybe we need to figure out other ways to use them. Maybe it's the way that you furnish them in a way that suggests that, yeah, I can only accommodate 6 people here instead of 30, right? So I think parks departments, it's incumbent upon them to inform people through the design decisions that they make.
Right. Just like to jump in here. I think that different places have taken different approaches to this. And one of the things that, I'm from the state of Michigan, and our governor, when she shut the state down, she said, but you should continue to go outside and walk. So we can make the messages clear, and continue to use the places. The wonderful Chicago's lakefront is a great example of a place that is super good for walking. And from a health perspective, the walking is good, but all of the mental health benefits are also good. So I really appreciate what you're saying, Kinder, about being thoughtful about how we approach these.
If I could add to that, I mean, clearly this is an opportunity for design to balance competing constraints, and that's something that we're very used to doing, you know, as designers. But I think we can look at, and you can look at it bluntly as quote unquote a problem to be solved. But what I find really moving about, you know, where this series started in that quote by Arundhati Roy, which is really kind of flipping the idea that it's a problem to be solved. It's kind of leaving behind the darkness and looking at this new future, new way of conceiving things. And that requires much more deep thinking, a much more profound way to look at things, and challenging ourselves to kind of step up and higher and look at it, and almost an encouragement or provocation to experiment. So, I mean, I see that, you know, from a design point of view, like, you know, one of the things that I have a son who's a major skater, and I ask him, you know, how are you? Because his mother and I am too, very concerned about, you know, how close he gets to other people, etc. And, you know, these kids, that, you know, his group, they decide to go at times when these parks won't be populated. And it made me think that if we rethink, I mean, how many times have you seen the placard in a park that says open dawn, you know, to dusk, or, you know, dawn to dusk is the operative time. But if we rethink that and think of public space as a way to stretch out the availability of open areas, it could mean that we de-densify, we reduce the chances for, in this case, you know, the spread of the pandemic, which then translates into how do you rethink lighting, for example. So I could see how this could be a revolution in lighting if we are to use parks 24/7. If everybody's working from home, we have much more flexibility. Maybe this is an opportunity to do staggered times, for example. Or by the same token, wayfinding. You know, we incorporate wayfinding in design projects all the time, but now it has a totally different implication because your life could depend on it. And so it's more than just a sign. It could be like haptic or textural. Somehow now the pandemic has taught us what 6 feet and 2 meters are. You know, I think for many people that, you know, these notions of space and proportion and scale, these are lessons that are driven home, and really our lives depend on it. So there's opportunities to think in those terms of design, but also to kind of pull back and say, well, how can we change the way we think of what public space is, and when it's available for us, and what can it be beyond what it is already.
Right. Sorry for the shameless plug, but I actually had a conversation about lighting in outdoor spaces a few weeks ago. Though that is available on our website, metropolismac.com/webinars. You should be able to view the recording of that discussion. And Roberto, some of the things you said were addressed in that conversation. I mean, it's clear we have to use lighting to extend the use of outdoor spaces. So that revolution, you're 100% spot on that. But your larger point, I think, is well taken too. You know, about how do we change how these spaces are used. We have a question here from Yvonne Batista, and I'd love to get the panelists to think about this too. Could the panelists comment on spaces for children? How can future park and open space design evolve to anticipate playground closures? Or should we approach design as a larger 880 perspective and not child specific? You know, connects a little bit, Roberto, to what you were saying about skate parks and letting people pick the time when they use things. But children's outdoor spaces, I mean, very often we talk about these things from an adult perspective, but can we think about children for a second?
Yeah, I'll jump in because I think it's a problem, for one thing. I mean, children are difficult to control their behaviors. And when they're together, they're like little humans and they just love to get together. And so I've seen numerous children's play areas that are shut down, basically, not available. But if you take away all the toys, children will play in nature. And one of the things that's interesting about education in the UK, where they've tried to incorporate nature into education, is they find that children will play at the edges of natural spaces where there's lots of materials to work with. And so maybe this is maybe I'm being a radical here, but maybe we don't have to provide the toys. Maybe that's actually the problem.
Yeah, I would, I would emphasize that. I think that, I mean, one thing Roberto kind of talked about was experimentation and, you know, how is this whole thing going to be new? And I do think that when you do start thinking about public dollars that are going to be available, that maybe new aesthetics are going to emerge in open space design. I think that there will be more wild places in cities, more nature in cities, because if you can't afford to maintain a park, but it's still a park, it becomes more wild on its own, right? In some cases, it does some cool things with carbon sequestration, I said that right, with things that can happen with stormwater, but also with play, right? You know, a lot of gyms are closed. Adult play is often in a gym, right? But so is there a way that you can go out and use those spaces as well for, you know, I don't know, lifting logs or stuff? But I think that if you give people the ability to kind of invent ways to use public space, and maybe some of these program things that we just can't use right now, use those as these experimentation zones for what is play. I think you could learn a lot that maybe starts to be applied to bigger and bigger open space systems that inform bigger and bigger pieces of our cities.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're very interested in, I would say, market agnostic solutions or user agnostic solutions or non-prescriptive solutions. So if you approach the object, you're not quite sure if it's a piece of public art or if it's a jungle gym or if it's a place to lean or perch or lie down or have a picnic. And we see that as a real nice opportunity in light of COVID. If you think about typical site furniture, it's channeling you to sit a certain way, to face a certain way. The touch points, the wear points are all in the same areas. Those are the areas where germs collect. If the products themselves, at least in our context, are less prescriptive, the way people interact with those products and the way they relate to them are much different.
It's really interesting. You know, I think Roberto's idea of experimentation, Kinder's idea of, you know, non-program spaces, and now Kurt, what you're saying, I think it's leading up in my head, at least, to a question of, you know, how can we trust people to use spaces and develop their own mechanisms of using space? How can we encourage them towards certain types of behavior? And for some reason, it makes me think of my neighborhood dog run, where a bunch of us dog owners actually maintain it. I mean, we get together every couple of weeks and, sorry, every couple of months, and we mulch it and clean it up, you know. Anyway, I digress. So I think, but there is a potential, I think, for new social relationships to form around outdoor space, maybe, and maybe that's one of the outcomes, and maybe some of those are informed by play, Kinder, as you said, and this idea of play and experimentation to be suffused through outdoor space. That's a really powerful idea. Kinder, your initial comments about funding for outdoor spaces have set off a storm among the audience questions. Everybody wants to know, A, what are some good ways to engage with decision makers around outdoor space as designers and landscape architects? And B, if we do have, if we are going to see funding challenges, or we're going to see fear, maybe even, and a hesitation to act on behalf of authorities, how do we deal with that as architects and landscape architects? I'm going to let you take that, and then let the others come in if they have a reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious things are that there are elected politicians, right, that have to make decisions on where money's going to be spent. And having groups of people that are invested in their public open space systems, showing up at city council meetings and making direct but professional pleads for, hey, people are using this stuff in new ways. It's been proven that this has helped. Not only it's changed the way people think about nature and themselves during this pandemic. We need more of it. I mean, that's job one to doing it. I think the other piece as well is that there's a huge movement across the country in conservancies or open spaces, that are kind of managed, maintained by the communities in which they live in. It may be a public park, but that community really thinks about how that space is used. There's in Houston, we have Spark Parks. It's the playgrounds of schools that become just a park anyone can use it other times of the day, right? So I think it's just being an advocate, right? If you stay home and you just are concerned about it, that's not going to help. You got to go out and help clean up or help design or help build a Spark Park. You need to go, like you do, to your local dog park and help, clean that thing up. And you got to go in and talk to people. You will find that there's a bunch of people out there that you probably never knew existed that are already doing this and are really excited about it and are pushing certain agendas. If you can join them, add to their voices, it will happen. Otherwise, we're going to get more roads, right? We're going to get, I don't know, better sidewalks, but maybe that's not necessarily the thing we want to come with those roads. We need to focus it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're going to try and take a few questions now at a fairly rapid clip. We're about 15 minutes to the scheduled end of the program. However, we will see if we can, because we have a number of questions in, we'll see if we can, if our panelists can stay with us for just about 10 minutes past the top of the hour. So if all of you in the audience want to stick around a little longer, we will go a little longer today. Again, we're here today talking about how the pandemic can be a portal to a new way of thinking about outdoor spaces. And we're here with Roberto Rivera from FIU, Dr. Sarah Warber from University of Michigan, Kinder Baumgartner from SWA, and Kurt Martin from Landscape Forums. Thank you all for all your amazing responses so far. We'll take a few questions now at a fairly rapid clip. There's an interesting question that's just come in from Thomas Papadinoff. He says, exterior spaces adjacent to densely occupied office structures and neighborhoods have always been important for personal and business health. So, we know that especially just pre-COVID, there was this huge movement linking, office real estate and public space as an amenity for office spaces. How will these spaces reflect social distancing and promote healthy environments? And should we be moving away from central plaza layouts and offer more options within the landscape? Are we looking at more flexible landscape solutions? So how do we start to think about those public spaces that we're seen as sort of green lungs for, commercial districts, for example?
Well, if I can maybe start, I mean, that also applies very much so. And I saw another question asking about how schools and colleges are adapting. That's very much, on topic. As an educator, we have, we're blessed with a really wonderful campus, lots of open areas. And you see as the university has grown that there's more and more of a demand to use that public space. So the level of amenity, the level of treatment has, been in parallel growth over the years. Now we're asking for these spaces to be potentially outdoor classrooms. And that's something that I think, as landscape architects, like I said, we can look at constraints and kind of model them and try and create these environments that are conducive to learning. Of course, in South Florida specifically, microclimate, shade, heat, humidity, these are all things that have to work. But the demand is there, and we're actually, looking at those things. How can these spaces become more than just something to walk through or something to look at, but really performing environments where the lessons could actually mean that you actually can open the universities and the schools if you rethink what these spaces are and what they can be.
Yeah, I really like that, because in all this anxiety that we've had around indoor spaces, putting up partitions, setting up cleaning protocols and so on, I see very little consideration of how outdoor space can actually be used as one of the strategies to continue activity and operations in commercial buildings, in schools, in universities, and so on, Roberto, as you were saying. We have a few questions here from the audience that relate to streets, streetscapes, and the opening of streets for pedestrian or bike use that we're seeing in many cities. Most people, I think, want to understand, is there a long-term approach? Is there a new long-term thinking about streets as public space? Will some of these temporary fixes stick around and stay? I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I'll jump in. We at SWA, our Laguna Beach office, just worked on a project to shut down the main street in Laguna Beach. It's a small town, but it's a bustling tourist place, lots of shops and restaurants, and they could not do the things that they do. So we closed the street and we built this armature that would basically have outdoor places to put racks for clothing, but also outdoor places to eat. And it was all very well designed, so it's sort of socially distanced. You can tell through the graphics on the street how to use it. It's working great. New York's doing it. There's been some issues there between certain city bureaucracies that have said, oh, this barrier isn't big enough or doesn't meet certain expectations. But in general, it seems like it's working well. And we're looking at it here in Houston with our Main Street. I think what we're going to find is that once, my first thought was, oh, it'll be super temporary. As soon as this thing's over, it'll be back to normal. But I do think that it's that tipping point, or the thin edge of the wedge. Once you kind of start to make this kind of change and you've turned over a street to the general public like this, and to shops and restaurants, it's going to be hard to take it back. And I think you're seeing bicycles out on streets where they weren't before. It's going to be hard to take it back. There are cities that have done a great job of, already mobilizing to build a lot of that sort of infrastructure, but there's plenty of Sunbelt cities that have not done it. It's all very kind of makeshift and kind of ad hoc. I think that may be that new aesthetic. It may remain that way a little bit, just paint and plywood. But that's okay if people are then able to do some stuff in the outdoors that they couldn't do before.
Right. I see a question here about public transportation. We're not going to address that today, but I will say we are going to hold another conversation around the future of transit, mass transit in particular, next month. So Greg Miller, please stay tuned and look out for that discussion. There's a couple of questions here about equity, and Roberto, maybe you want to address this first, and then we'll talk about others. We're just about 10 minutes to the top of the hour, so we're gonna try and take a few questions at a time so that we can get to as many of them as possible. There's a question here about how we can think about redistribution of redistribution, quote unquote, of wealth or of resources among communities, and using public space to do that. Samia Kirshner says that perhaps one way to think about it is to make, through architecture and planning, residents of a neighborhood self-sufficient by making them food secure. You know, I think there's also a question here about somebody commented, Dr. Warber, saying that you gave us a great commentary on social and economic impacts of health, and that they have seen medical allies push the message that racism is a public health issue. I think we're starting to see a whole bunch of issues being viewed through this lens of equity. And I'd love to just get some reactions from you all on how outdoor space in particular, which is the topic of today's discussion, can be used as a tool for building equity in our cities.
I recently heard a really great way to think about equity, you know, as opposed to equality, because they're not the same thing. You know, if we think of equality as being invited to a party, something that's equitable is being invited to dance. So it totally changes the way that we think of spaces. They're not just there, but maybe they might feel off-putting or you don't belong there. And, you know, in a society like ours, which is, you know, presumably open and democratic, the spaces that we design have to have that mandate to be open and welcoming, regardless of, you know, who you are, what your socioeconomic status is. You can go there and participate for 50 cents or 50 bucks, as an architect friend likes to say. And that's really fundamental, that we have environments and spaces that are not signaling that they are only for some people. And I think that that's something that we will continue to have to work on, because I think for a very long time, you know, design has kind of facilitated a certain separation. I mean, historically, there's been complicity and redlining and things like that, and at a very high level. So we have to rethink these assumptions and redesign and provide for open spaces, public spaces, equitable spaces that address these inequities.
I mean, just super quick, I was going to say that, you know, the way you do this is you ask the users what they want, right? There's a sort of, I think in design circles, sort of the New Yorkification of, you know, everything. I need a High Line everywhere, right? And that's not what every neighborhood needs or wants. And we just need to be very cognizant of that.
Yeah, it can be as simple as redoing a vacant lot, which in Detroit, for example, those vacant lots become derelict and difficult and challenge everybody in the neighborhood, including the behavior of children and everyone else.
There's been some amazing work with pocket parks, you know, pocket urban farms, things like that in Detroit, which is really powerful. I urge everyone to look into it. It's been really great. There is a question here, and I think it bears asking, maybe not exactly in the format that it's been asked, but how much are all of you using the new research around health and outdoor space in your own work? Can we just reflect on that just a little bit? The idea that, you know, we know that green space supports positive health outcomes. Does anybody have examples of how you've actually used that in your work? Kurt, maybe you want to talk about how that influences landscape forms.
Yes, thanks, Avi. Absolutely. That's a big influencer on what we do. We've recently created a series of outdoor structures for outdoor learning, outdoor working, outdoor healing that offer people amenities that they want today. Power, if it's an outdoor space, place to hook in your devices, outdoor presentation, kind of amenities, the ability to control glare or sun or wind, essentially small architectural elements that really address those needs. In almost everything we do, we're thinking about the human behavioral aspect of this and getting people outdoors. And what is it that they need today versus maybe what did they need 20 years ago or 30 years ago? And what is it that they value? And how do we appeal to them in terms of value today? So we see a huge uptick in people seeing the total campus or the total outdoor space, not as Roberto said, as a pass-through space, but as usable square footage. And they're beginning to see the value in that, and we're very pleased because statistically or typically the outdoor space is the least expensive space to invest in as compared to indoor space. And that's real. That's real. And if we can communicate in terms of value to our customers, and if we can help landscape architects and designers provide solutions for them to be able to get out and use outdoors in the outdoor environments, even if it's just adjacent to the building. And I always say a half an inch away because that's the thickness of glass. That's an under-innovated area. If you think about how innovation has affected your life on every level, and then you look outside, there's a lot of opportunity there. And it's, in my opinion, it's the most important place that human can spend their time. And I always ask this, and I'll ask it today, but you know, if it's not, if you believe it's not, or you think I'm off, just tell me about your next vacation. And is it going to be indoors or outdoors? You know, so it absolutely fuels everything we do.
If I can point to a great resource, and I guess this is a little shameless plug for the Landscape Architecture Foundation, but if you want an incredible library of examples and proof of concept, look at landscapeperformance.org, because it's full of, and case study investigations. If you go there, it features projects. Actually, Buffalo Bayou is featured as one, and you can categorize and filter by different categories that show quantitatively and qualitatively how well these spaces work. We're constantly using this not only in my practice, but as an educator as well. Students are asked to look at case studies and look at precedents. So that's a great resource, and that can be leveraged in many, many directions.
Yeah, I mean, we've used the information from LAF to inform our projects in the early stages, so that you can use that for that ask. It might be to a philanthropic foundation or to a municipality on, you know, money and why that money should be spent on a park, which may seem frivolous to certain people. Once you understand that it's actually improving the health and wellness and welfare of a community, it suddenly gets easy.
Right. Kinder, let's just take this really quickly. There's a follow-up question to a comment that you made. But before we do that, we're almost at the top of the hour here. I would be remiss if I didn't thank all of you again for all the time you've spent with us today. Roberto Rivera from FIU, and also at the Landscape Architecture Foundation, which you just mentioned, Roberto. Kinder Baumgartner from SWA, Kurt Martin from Landscape Forms, and Dr. Sarah Warber from University of Michigan. Thank you all so much for spending time with us. And also, of course, thank you to Landscape Forms for making this discussion possible. We are going to take I think just two more questions here. One question I think that that we can maybe respond pretty quickly, and then maybe a larger question to close us out today. One of the attendees asked, Kinder, you mentioned asking what the users want, but the less financially well-off communities aren't always able to participate due to work inflexibility, access to childcare, and other reasons. How do we reach communities that can't participate in community engagement in the traditional sense? And earlier we had another question from other panelists talking about how participatory design actually has become so much more difficult during the pandemic. Kinder, I know SWA's work on Buffalo Bayou and other projects has huge community engagement components in it. So maybe you want to tell us a little bit about, you know, even if you don't have solutions right now, just what some of those challenges are or how you're viewing them. And then Roberto, maybe you want to come in on that one as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in a nutshell, I think the simplest answer is that engagement is not a one-time meeting, right? It's like, oh, we're all going to meet at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday and figure this thing out. Yeah, there might need to be a meeting at 4 o'clock on a Thursday, but there needs to be a bunch of other meetings too, right? And they need to be at different times and in different locations. That's what we do in Houston all the time. You move sort of from place to place to place. But also there's other kinds of events that go on where you can have a table and a tent, right? And you can ask people for their input at that. So then that's extending that engagement. Is a very different kind of engagement. We're starting a project actually tonight in Atlanta where I can't go right now, but we're starting the public engagement piece, and it's going to be all done. It's web-based, and there's some great software which I didn't know existed a week ago, just like I had never used Zoom 2 months ago or 3 months ago. But we're using this software for people and it's just going to be up there, right? They can go to this website anytime. Yes, they have to have internet connectivity to do this, But time is not an issue. They can mark the places they want to go. They can put photographs of things that are important to them. They can write comments, all that. So if you pair that with these other pieces, I think you capture a pretty good snapshot of what's going to work.
Right, right.
And I would only add that, yes, it's many layers, many touch points, many ways of communicating. We do plenty of design studios in our education at FIU where we're working with communities. Clearly, I think that the challenge of the digital divide, not everybody will have access to the same tools to communicate. And that's something we have to constantly challenge ourselves to improve and ask ourselves, are we listening to the right stakeholders? Are we speaking in their language, many times literally? And it's just an ongoing process that will only get better the more that you do it in many ways.
We started this conversation, of course, with that quote from Arundhati Roy in the Financial Times. That article is called "The Pandemic as a Portal," and it is available to read for free on the Financial Times website. So anybody who's curious about it, please go ahead and check it out. What is this new future for outdoor space that we should all be engaged with? What if there is an idea that you would like to see us carry forward from this pandemic, what would it be?
I think that I would say that it's us, it's us. We get to do what we want to do. We got here by doing what we wanted to do. It wasn't always the right thing. But we've seen from the pandemic that when we stop doing things, suddenly nature will fill in the gap and they'll come back. We can do that. We can change that. And likewise, we've found out that when we're confined to our houses, we can actually go outdoors. And in this particular pandemic, we can still be safe if we will moderate our behavior a little bit. So it's us, and we can make it how we want.
On the topic of us, I would say that, there's this really fundamental need to balance what I would describe as the visceral and the quantitative. For a while, I think that we fell into a trap that the answers will come from the right and most intense analysis. But we're creatures, to go back to the idea of our connection with nature and how we might emerge out of this with a renewed sense of what it is. It's not just what it offers, but our need. I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years, I think as human beings, we have looked to nature as this inspiring thing, as a scary thing. It's part of our myths, our stories, and that will not go away. So we have to balance this kind of visceral understanding, this qualitative understanding, and the quantitative as well, and find a way to bring these two things together. Because we won't change unless we are able to recognize the power that myth and that story and these fictions sometimes have over us, much more than just we can't look at it as an engineering problem to be solved. It's much more and deeper than that.
Yeah, and I would go back to innovation, experimentation, and doing things fast and cheaply. I think that's going to be the big thing that comes out of this. Because I think a year ago, everything that we did had to be more luxurious and more expensive than the next in the public realm. And if there really is not going to be, ample funds to do all that stuff, we're already doing like this thing in Laguna Beach. We're already doing really cool stuff that is fast and cheap and very experimental. Will it last? I don't know, but at least we've gotten out there and tried and said, hey, this street, we didn't really need all these cars on it. And hey, people could come outside and be less affected by the pandemic for a moment, right? But I think the more places that we can use those techniques, just the more interesting the world's going to get.
I think from a product perspective for us, it's really about giving people a sense of safety and control over one's environment, outdoors, be it in space or relating to an object. And for us, I think it's really about the ability to experiment, move quickly, as you said, but also not create solutions that are of an era or that are instantly recognizable as the COVID kind of era, but products that actually will stand the test of time in maybe this period of time will help us innovate and evolve well beyond what we may have if this wouldn't have happened, and we can look at these products with pride in the future.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great note for us to close on today, because we're simultaneously juggling the needs of today, where we're living in considerable anxiety and fear, with what we hope will be a more positive tomorrow, and that we can use this opportunity to affect the change that we want to see in the world. Thank you all so much for this afternoon, and have a great evening.
Hello, I'm Helene Oberman, Managing Director of Interior Design Magazine, and I'd like to welcome you to Product Live. This is our series that delves into the products and trends grabbing the industry, and in real time, looking at the minds behind the design. Today, we're on a journey to a new path forward, the concept behind Mohawk Group's inaugural virtual design summit, Design Forward, which explores the new introductions of 2020 and looks ahead to 2021. With inspirational insight from both design luminaries and the industry's rising stars. The purpose? To connect people, products, and place. Mohawk Group has the understanding that the path to better design and sustainability begins with community, and if we cannot be together in person, let's do it right here, virtually. With me today is Jeanette Himes, Director of Design, Workplace and Retail for Mohawk Group. Welcome, Jeanette. It's lovely to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise. So I just thought, before we really dive into product talk, can you give us a little insight behind the impetus for the launch of Design Forward?
It's really been such a great dynamic opportunity for us to meet with our valued customers and to build relationships and to get our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the industry.
I think right now, obviously, more so than ever, it's really important to think about how to keep the community connected. So to sort of take this event that you've been doing it and obviously bring it virtually is super key. But obviously sort of diving into the product sphere, with your new carpet introductions for 2020, which extend your Living Product series, they really value and are centered around sort of human health and performance. What does that really mean for Mohawk Group?
It means a lot of things, and now it's something we're going to have to take a look at even more closely. But first of all, it means making things redless free, easy to clean. I mean, those are kind of entry-level things that we need to keep top of mind. And then also, those acoustic qualities are so important to like the mental health and productivity in a space. And then the other thing we consider a lot is color, of course, since flooring is one of the largest, if not the largest surface in an installation. Color can really affect the whole mood in the interior space. And so it's very important. It can bring in a lot of therapeutic and well-being qualities. And we all have an innate reaction to color, and it's scientific.
And just really quickly, could you give us a small insight into the Living Product series in general and what that means for Mohawk Group as well?
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. It's been a very holistic, amazing journey. It's something we started with ILFI, and we've started it here with our Light Lab studio, and then we moved on to products. So the principles are not only doing less bad, I mean, there's definitely those requirements spelled out in the program, but also trying to give back and do better and be like a net positive in many areas. So it's neat. I mean, there's so many things you can learn, and there's so many ways you can apply it to design. So, I mean, it's really a journey, and there's things you can do always to keep getting incrementally better. And it's an exciting journey.
I think we all need to do just a little bit something better in everything that we do every day, even if it's baby steps. So it's really key. I'm curious in terms of Mohawk Group and the way that you guys design, which you sort of translate into this systems thinking, and really how that can be applied to some of the new product introductions that you have for 2020.
Systems thinking and flooring is really key. Like many of our products are actually modular, and so thinking through how those can give the most benefit to our customers. So certainly, especially in carpet tile, we think in terms of having multiple patterns in a collection that can be mix and match, and you can use for wayfinding and accent areas and all kinds of those things. So first of all, we think within the collection, the patterns in a collection, maybe colors that can be mix and match in a collection, but then also just holistically in the line, patterns and colors that can be mixed and matched in other collections, and then other surfaces. We want them to transition seamlessly to our hard surface. We want to be able to also use them with broadloom, and there's so many areas where different types of flooring suit different needs and have better applications. We want to give our customers the most value, the most choice, so they can realize their vision for the space.
Ultimately, it sounds like you're creating flooring that can assist with some of these new behaviors that we're going to be adopting with sort of this new workplace.
Yeah, so I mean, this is not something that is necessarily top of mind in workplace. It may be in other market segments. And so now we're having to look really closely at these things. And so in workplace, we've borrowed really heavily from residential and hospitality design in the past, but now, I mean, we're really going to have to start examining best practices in like airports and hospitals and other kinds of public space design. Yeah, and those wayfinding techniques are really key. And I mean, we'll just see, we're already working with our customers to see how can we build those visual cues for people so they can keep their appropriate social distance. You don't want it to be overpowering and make people uncomfortable. You want it to help people feel comfortable. So yeah, there's a lot of techniques that can be used in carpet that can be used very holistically with the other cues in the space to bring a sense of comfort and ease and to make people feel safe.
No, of course. And I mean, I can understand it's about wayfinding, but it's also about like this idea of like zoning, where it's like I can be here and you can be there and we're safely together but distance in a way.
Yeah, that's so well said. Yeah, that's so well said.
So I know that you guys are always listening to the needs of the design community, hence something like Design Forward. How have you found the brand shifting its focus given the new demands of this new workplace and sort of this post-pandemic world?
Yeah, well, there's kind of two things that I notice most clearly. Like in our design department, normally we're here to kind of help our customers execute their vision. But now, I mean, we're all trying to figure this out, and we're all trying to figure out what are the boundaries, what is needed, and we're all in this big observation and experimental mode. So we find our design department really becoming a very service-oriented department more than ever. And we've always had our 2D and 3D visualization services, but now, I mean, it's so much more integrated in the design, and we're really coming alongside people and helping them figure this out.
So I know that we're living in a time right now where the health and well-being of people is more important than ever. How does biophilia, which eases stress, provides emotional and physical comfort, and connects people to their need for nature, really play a role in your living product series, including some of your recent introductions, such as large and local LVT collection?
So biophilia is very critically important in the interior environment, and it's something that as a designer is fascinating. There's so many ideas and themes and techniques to explore. So it just gives us endless opportunities for creativity, but we appreciate all those benefits it can bring. And so specifically in our LVT, those wood visuals are so amazing. I mean, it's literally a wood visual that we all can respond to. And then in our large and local collection, we're bringing in those more natural wood tones and kind of the rustic finish. And it's not a slick kind of synthetic look. It is more that biophilic natural look that just makes such a warm space and so soothing and healing.
We should really get into what the specific introductions for 2020 are. Can you give us some insight?
Yeah, one thing we've already launched is our Smart City collection, which was done in collaboration with Gensler. We're very excited about it.
You get a hit winner. Congratulations.
Oh, is that? Yeah.
Winner. Yeah.
So the inspiration behind this collection is their initiative for smart cities, designing cities using technology for the benefit of the residents and to uplift human life. And so we're focusing here on transit systems in 5 major metros around the country that are very dynamic exchange of ideas and transit systems. And so there's 2 styles. One is more of a background texture, kind of an organic, and then there's 5 corresponding styles with a beautiful, like kind of a tracery geometric pattern laid on top of that. So that's kind of the best of both worlds. It's an organic and then that suggestion of geometry.
And then you have large and local, correct?
Yes, and large and local. We're really excited about that. That gives you those beautiful wood visuals. You have the beautiful wood tone colors, like natural wood tone colors. One has a more smooth finish, and then one has more of a rustic finish that has like a circle sawn texture that you can see. It's really beautiful.
And then, so of course, there's pattern and symmetry.
And pattern and symmetry, again, that comes from our wonderful Eden Mill. Those are 2 styles that kind of reinterpret the beautiful like men's and women's wear classics. They're kind of classic plaids, but when they're done in this woven construction, they look actually very architectural and modern.
And then looking ahead, you have something called Optic Cues coming up.
So Optic Cues was an LVT that we're manufacturing here in the US, and it was developed specifically to go with our Optic Reset carpet plank collection. And Optic Cues, we get asked a lot for visuals other than wood and stone and LVT. And so this was our answer to that. It has a beautiful kind of timeless textile visual to perfectly dovetail with Optic Reset, which has 3 styles, and it ends up being kind of a dark, a light, and a medium. Styles that can be used interchangeably that would be great for now, for those wayfinding techniques that we're starting to incorporate a lot more. So the inspiration for Optic Reset and then Optic Cues also came from our color and design vision. And the theme behind that is how, just as we're doing now, that art and design and photography, these are all becoming so democratized because we all have access to our cell phones, we all have access to all these digital medias, and then we all can kind of become artists and designers. And so that was some of the inspiration where we came up with some of those textures that you can mix and match, and there's like a positive negative of one of the designs.
And then, you know, I know the company upholds the idea of social responsibility, which I know comes in the form of keeping a lot of production locally, especially here in the USA. And can you talk a little bit about where some of your new product collections, including Smart City and Pattern and Symmetry and obviously Large and Local, are produced?
So Large and Local and our upcoming Optic Cues collection, these are US made LVT. They're just made down the road here in Dalton, Georgia. And then our woven goods are made in our historic weaving mill, which was a Karastan mill in Eden, North Carolina. And then
so my understanding, isn't that like 90 years old or 90 years of production?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I mean, we're really proud of that. And
yeah,
to this career through handcrafts, and I'm a textile designer. And I mean, yeah, we all just have a special love for that mill. And then our carpet tile is made in Glasgow, Virginia, which is a beautiful area in a wildlife kind of preserve area. That's a living site, and that's, again, where all our carpet tile is made.
So I know that Mohawk Group has a really strong sustainability mission, and that's from offsetting your energy, your water, and your other resources, all the while meeting and exceeding net zero carbon standards. In order to give more back to the environment than obviously the company is taking, you have developed what you call unique hand printing initiatives. Can you walk us through what that actually means?
Yeah, that's one of the things we're really most excited about, and there's just more and more we'll continue to keep doing. But a few things that we do already to get those certifications is we have in our Glasgow, Virginia mill area, we have made efforts to support those wildlife areas. So that's one thing, supporting that ecosystem in that area. And two, we actually have beehives there. And, you know, we all know how important bees are to the ecosystem. So we have bees there on site. At several colleges, one's in Atlanta, Morehouse College in Atlanta, we have reached out to them and helped them with their water conservation. So we have helped them retrofit some of their water. So there's many benefits to that. It helps save on their utility costs, but then helps them also contribute to a sustainability message. And so those are just really neat partnerships. And there's just a lot more that we're exploring and can do, but those are things we have going on right now.
So, Jeanette, unfortunately, we've only been able to scratch the surface with our discussion today, but you know, really appreciate your time and some of your insight into the new productions and really at the mission behind Mohawk Group and about who you are as a company, as a brand, and really how you're giving back both locally and globally to the world and the environment. And to our audience, please make sure to check out the Mohawk Group website to learn more about these product introductions, about their mission, and of course, to learn more about their virtual summit, Design Forward. Thank you.